Hey friends, thanks for joining me again. Recently I got a question on one of my videos about, I can't remember exactly what it says and I don't have it in front of me, but it was something like, what caused you to be so frugal and why are you the way you are? Have you, always been this way, or did it change along the way, or how did this work? Something along those lines. And so basically it made me remember, because I've been wanting to do this for a long time, that I've really never shared my story. And part of that is because I really didn't want to embarrass my parents, as you'll see in a minute. But I got their permission to share some of this with you so that it wouldn't be, something I'm just putting out there on the internet for everyone to see and, against their permission. So I have talked to my parents. They gave me the permission to share the information that I'm going to share in this video, and it's all good. So my dad had mentioned that he had gotten a Social Security statement in the mail. And he was like, yeah, it's kind of cool. It lists out all of the money that I've made my whole life. And I was like, wow, that's cool. Do you mind if I see it? That'd be really interesting to look at. And he was totally fine with it. Here you go, look at it. And so I was looking at it and it broke it down by decade. Here's how much he made in the 70s. Here's how much he made in the 80s, the 90s, and so on. And of course, out of curiosity, I'm like looking at the years when I was mainly alive and when I was being raised, because I always knew my dad didn't really make that much money. I just didn't really know exactly how much that actually was. So he said that when he first started, he was making like $4.25 an hour and stuff like that. And I'm like, wow, that's not very much money. Because I was raised in the 90s. I was in kindergarten in 90, and then I was part of the class of '02. The main bulk of when I was being raised is basically what I would consider from kindergarten through about 10th grade. Because when you're in 10th grade, maybe 11th, you can start getting a job for yourself. You can start, driving for yourself, buy a car. There's a lot more that you can do. So when you're mainly in your parents' care and they're the ones who are mainly taking care of you, and when you're being raised, in my opinion, is basically that decade there. So from 1990 until about the year 2000 is mainly the years when I was really growing up as a kid. So I looked at his little statement, I added it all up and put together how much average he makes per year. He made an average of $16,000 a year. That's really not very much money. And so I think it's pretty safe to say that I was raised poor. That was definitely below the poverty line. And I'm not trying to say this from but there's lots of people who live in worse conditions. I know that. What I'm saying is we had my dad working and that was it. My mom did not have a job for any of those years. And we had a family of 5. So yeah, with just that much money to work with for a year, you're really not going to have that much. So there are a lot of we were so poor that stories, but I don't want to tell too many of them because that could go on for days probably. But here's just a few. What does that actually look like raising a child with that much kind of money? All right, so I remember using a grocery sack or a grocery bag as a backpack. You know how grocery bags have 2 handles plus the middle where you put your groceries? You can put like one on one arm and then one on the other, and then the bottom kind of flaps there so you can put your books in there and then put it on, and yeah, instant backpack. And it was sort of a good science experiment because when you put 2 of them together, it's actually like 3 times as strong. So yeah, there's that. That's pretty cool. I remember my brother getting a bed for the first time. He slept on the floor for a long time, but we ended up with a hand-me-down bed from some kind of a neighbor who knows where, and he couldn't sleep on it. He had slept on the floor for so long that it was too soft. He needed the floor and the firmness of the floor for a while. So he was like all excited, oh yay, my little brother has a bed. And then he couldn't sleep on it for like a week or 2 until he slowly got himself used to sleeping on it. I remember being really cold in the wintertime. I remember it being really, really cold at night even, especially, and we only had a certain amount of blankets. So when I wanted to be a little bit warmer and I was having trouble sleeping because it was so cold, I would fold my blankets in half and then it's like a double blanket, so it's twice as thick. And I remember there being even such cold nights that wasn't enough, lay really straight and still. So fold it again to where the blanket is folded into quarters and then sleep in a ball, to stay warm. I remember that on many occasions. My mom would make this stuff called Radigan stew, which was basically, that was a name my dad came up with it. And it was different every time. It was basically whatever cans that we had gotten from whatever church or wherever we had gotten them from. So there would be like a can of corn, a can of beans, and a can of tomatoes, you know, and then she'd spice it up and make it taste good. And then the next night it'd be something totally different, you know, who knows what kind of cans she would use that time. So yeah, again, it was totally different. It was just a mix of whatever we could get, pretty much. And then there were other times when, you know, I'd be walking to school and it'd be like frigidly cold, and all I had was like a windbreaker, certainly not a good enough winter jacket for, you know, the conditions that we have here in Colorado and stuff like that. Or I remember in my freshman year of high school, all I owned was 2 pairs of pants and 4 shirts. I mean, that's it. So it was so hard too. Freshman year in high school kind of matters. So I remember being like really bummed and wishing so badly that I could have had just 1 more shirt. Because a school week is 5 days, of course. So only having 4 shirts means I had to wear one of them twice, and we only did laundry once a week. My parents would do laundry on the weekends, which means I had to wear a dirty shirt every single week, and I had to wear that same shirt twice. So yeah, there were definitely some things that I could say, you know, and keep going on. You know, we only had 1 car as a family. It was a 1-car family type thing. That sort of stuff. We didn't really do much, you know. I never remember taking a whole lot of vacations. When we did, they were like car trips. They always ended up in all sorts of, you know, drama because we had, you know, run out of gas, or we'd have a problem with a tire or something like that, because, or we'd break down because they didn't really have that great at cars. You know what I'm saying. So yes, We Are So Poor That stories that could go on for quite a while. It was definitely the case that we were raised in what I would call some pretty good poverty here in the United States. Pretty bad poverty, I should say. Not like third world country. Yes, we had shoes. Not always good ones. Oh, here's another good story. Oh, I don't want to tell these all day. Anyway, so I remember having sandals and it starting to snow and having sandals be the only kinds of shoes that we had. So what we would do is I would put on like 2 pairs of socks, then I would put on my sandals, and then we would take newspaper bags. You know those big long ones? Well, I would put them on my feet over the sandals, and then I would put rubber bands on my legs to hold them up. And then that's how I made my snow boots. They were all waterproof. So when we had to do stuff like that, I would intentionally be late to school because I'm not gonna like be walking to school. Obviously I had to walk to school. We had 1 car. So even when I was like 6 years old, walking to, you know, the elementary school, which was like better than a half a mile away by myself, you know, I'm not gonna want all the other kids to see me wearing grocery bags on my feet. They're gonna make fun of me. So I would just like stay behind and kind of like wait, and then I would walk to school later on after all the other kids had gone in, and then quick take it off and put it in my backpack so that I wouldn't end up having to wear wet socks all day because I didn't have shoes. All I had was sandals, and it was snowy out. So that's how I made my own DIY snow boots. Okay, that's the last one. So yes, I would call that grinding poverty. Definitely some real poverty. But here are some really cool things that I learned from that. I learned that life was sink or swim. I either had to learn how to swim or I was going to sink, because if my parents are in this kind of situation and when I'm growing up or when I'm fully grown up, I have to make it on my own. And I knew that. I knew that there was no way I could fall back on them for whatever reason, and that's how we live even today. When we had our kids, I never once asked them for money for diapers or anything like that. I mean, we cloth diapered, so that wasn't an issue, but that's part of the reason why I chose cloth diapers, is because I didn't want to have to pay for disposable ones. That's expensive. And I knew I needed to stay within my own budget, so it just made the most sense. You know, we didn't ask for money for our wedding. We paid for our wedding all on our own. We did not ask for money for a down payment for our house. They wouldn't have been able to produce it. I just didn't have that kind of, you know, safety net like a lot of people, you know, average people who grow up in nice suburban neighborhoods and with average families who aren't raising their children in poverty have. My parents could not have put me through college. If I wanted to go to college, I would have had to pay for it myself. And I didn't want to go into that kind of debt for it. So there are a lot of things, again, I learned, and it worked out for the better. So let me start with some of the negatives. That way we can leave off on the positive note.